All yours.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, today to another episode as we now enter a new quarter, which we will be discussing electricity and just tech in general, inventions. So let me give it over to my co-host here.
Yeah, man. So just moving into our next episode, and that's also going into our next quarter. And yeah, just discussing everything that technology entails, man, like any breakthroughs in the world, any crisis, any macroeconomic issues, man. So like I think it's a really important topic as well, because these things are changing by the second. So I'd love to explore that direction with this podcast.
Without any further ado, let's dive right in. My name is Brendan Nell.
My name is Llewellyn, and this is Finding Borders.
Roll intro.
All right, so we've been discussing lately something that's quite a big issue in South Africa, but also in Australia, and that's
athlete's foot.
Yeah, and that's load shedding.
Now, for many of our listeners that is not well familiar with this concept, it is a thing actually that has quite become, which we would consider quite a very large, sizable pain in the ass here in South Africa. It's essentially just an ongoing period where we experience widespread rolling blackouts. And this has actually started in 2007.
Yeah, and in 2021 alone, there was something like 1,169 hours of load shedding. Now, at this stage, you might ask yourself, for those who don't know, what is load shedding? So there's two types of load shedding. Okay, there's automatic load shedding. Basically, when the electronic systems cut themselves off to protect the network from any damage. So I imagine that's when you'd have a tree that falls on a fence and a circuit breaker just cuts the network off. Then you have manual load shedding, and that is when the system is purposely turned off. Now, in South Africa's case, it's because these manual load sheddings occur when demand exceeds supply. So if there's not enough, gigawatts of energy to meet the supply, they essentially portion the electricity that can be used at that stage. Like I said, in South Africa in 2021 alone, man, there was 1,169 hours of load shedding, which is a lot. And that has essentially been 2,521 gigawatts hours that have been shed. So it's sizable, man. And yeah, like we just mentioned South Africa has this issue. I did also read in South Australia that also has an energy crisis. They have experienced load shedding just like South Africa. And what happened in the early 2020s, the late 2010s, Tesla had built a battery in Hornsdale, South Australia, that houses energy for consumption. And yeah, it was just interesting to see that a third world and a first world country both have parts of the country have the same problem.
Really is a growing problem, and especially in South Africa's case, where it's now been continuing for upwards of 15 years now. It's become almost an everyday occurrence. I mean, for example, last month, we've entered a new stage of load shedding, as it also runs in stages over here, which we have been without power, I think, for up to around 4 hours a day, and which you consider it's quite a lot. It's usually 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night. But if you can think about the economic ramifications that it might bring for like any sort of business running without electricity, And even as a student, it's not only businesses and the economy, but it reaches each and every part of society. It is absolutely just frustrating, and to think that there's not much end in sight. And I think the reason for this is, I think probably in the country you're listening to, and many of our listeners, especially in Western countries, I think that the power and electricity has been privatized by a lot of companies. So especially in South Africa and Africa in large scale, it's become a monopoly. It's very much government run over here at the company called Eskom, which they also give power to other countries in Africa, which I think only in South Africa, we're the only ones that have load shedding and not the other countries that Eskom also supplies electricity to. So these disruptions really had our toll on the people. But Llewellyn, I think as well, in your time in South Africa, Oblian has started, like, what memories do you have of load shedding? And I do imagine they're not very fond.
Like in South Africa, I remember very, very distinctly, like in 2015, they had load shedding, which was probably stage 1 or 2 or whatever. It goes up to like 5 stages or 6 stages or something. Where the power went out every night for an hour between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. And yeah, man, like it's not ideal, because if you're a student, you have to work in the dark, or you can't work on any of your devices. As an employer, you can't do any admin unless you have a paper-based business, but you'll still be in candlelight. And it's a country that's not exactly pushing for solar energy. Like it's the government doesn't, or at that time didn't have any incentives for private homeowners to branch out into solar energy. It was a cost you'd have to wear. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't tax deductible, and I'm not saying, you can't claim the money on anything, but from my memory, I never saw commercials where they said the government is pledging this amount of money for these incentives. And now at the moment, you guys have, there's a few things that go into it. Like, so I've mentioned how much gigawatt hours have been shed, and how many hours of time have been lost due to load shedding. But then there's the cost of it as well. Like, it's cost billions and billions of rands. Eskom, like you said, who's the monopolized business in South Africa that provides electricity. This load shedding in 2021 has cost them an additional 10.8 billion rand already, which is over $1 billion. And they've already got operating costs of 196 billion rand, which is 19.6 billion Australian dollars. So, and on top of that, man, like the manner in which they do create the electricity, it's all still diesel powered. So they would, Eskom would use, or its systems would be the open cycle gas turbines, which need diesel to be operated. And I was reading with this lovely war in the Ukraine that's happening at the moment, that skyrocketed the price of diesel. You'll find that if diesel cost a few years ago 15 rand for a liter, which is $1.50 if you want to be technical, it would be approximately about $4.50 to generate 1 kilowatt hour. But now with the diesel price skyrocketing due to the war, you have 20 rand per liter, which is going to cost like 6 rand per kilowatt hour, and you're creating gigawatts of electricity. So the operating costs would increase, which I think then will be pushed back onto the household. So yeah, man, to sum up everything I've just said, I don't have any fond memories of load shedding. Definitely not.
Do you think maybe a future approach to like a greener approach to much more cleaner and sustainable energy might be the way? Or do you imagine maybe another electricity company maybe starting so that it becomes some form of competition? Like, what do you think would be a good remedy as to load shedding, just in the right direction? Because obviously this is not a problem that's going to be solved overnight or even with 1 year. But what do you think would be the most, in your opinion, the immediate resolve to the situation?
I don't think there'll be an immediate resolve, but I do think if you, like I mentioned, the government doesn't have any incentives for people to get solar power. Like if the government, instead of putting the cost back onto the consumer, if they actually gave incentive for you to go and buy your solar energy and go off the grid, sort of thing. That would be one option towards a greener system. Another way would be that, yeah, we if there's another company who can do it better, cheaper, a private company, not a company that has shareholders as such, then that would definitely put competition in the market, and you'd find, that there would be competitive prices. Everyone can now switch between providers. That'll affect the cost of living, because you can't change the population. You can't decrease the population by any means. And you can't really increase the amount of diesel that's in the world. So you could argue that, yeah, they should start looking at solar farms or turbines or anything along those lines. We have windy regions in the Western Cape. I do know that we have a massive solar farm in the North Cape between, just outside of Kimberley. So there are open plains of land where that can be done, but there is no immediate solution. Like it's honestly a problem that's going to be around with the South African consumer.
Definitely. Going off topic a bit, I was wanting to ask you what you thought about Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter, which I think has been all over the news. And why do you think his reign as the top dog of this social media giant will bring? Because I know he's quite an advocate of free speech. Do you think that he will, I don't know, expand on this idea, or do you think Twitter will just remain the same? Because personally, for me, I don't have a Twitter account. I haven't been on it for years, but I do imagine now with these acquisitions that I would give it another go.
Yeah, man. Like on the note of Tesla and Elon Musk, a lot of people aren't happy about it. There are people who now believe that, yeah, the platform is going to be open for hate speech, and it's going to now be an all over horrid thing to have. But I don't know, like I don't pay much attention to Twitter either. I feel like it's like a Facebook blend of LinkedIn. Like it's pretty much for the famous. It's not exactly for the everyday person. Just open an account and tweet things and people will see it. It's weird. I haven't delved too much into Twitter, man. But yeah, man, like even like you'll find there have been some technologies that actually consume less energy. Like you'll find things like LEDs, and you'll find some solar paneling on everyday items like power banks, and things like that have become quite common for the everyday consumer. But yeah, like on the note of like, your power banks and your LEDs and stuff like that, man. I want to go back to a time where BlackBerry was still around. If you'll remember that, like, and how it was a company that just like, it's safe to assume that the majority of teenagers between the years 2005 and 2015, if that, had a BlackBerry, man. Like they had this really crazy plan where for $6 a month, for 60 rand a month, you can get unlimited internet. Obviously that didn't include things like YouTube, but you also had a built-in messaging app called BlackBerry Messenger, or BBM. And for the average South African back then, it didn't have access to internet. Like that was a very attractive thing, and BlackBerry definitely doubled down on that innovation. But in a country like South Africa where mobile data is really expensive, it was, like I said, very attractive, but the phones themselves just lacked innovation. Like the company stuck to its guns without any change. And yeah, they just eventually just didn't cut it. They moved their app onto Android, Google Play, and Apple's App Store, and then they had Android OS loaded onto their phones in 2016 and 17, and since then I don't think I've heard anything from them. And yeah, the same thing can be said for Nokia. Like Nokia just a lot of good phones that sold forever. Like they started in the 70s and they made the phone, the reliable, affordable phone, indestructible phone. And they tried selling that idea in a world where phones became touchscreen and phones had multi-purposes like cameras, and speakers, and they could play music through them. Like they caught on to that idea too late. And in 2013 and 14, when Nokia had been bought out by Microsoft, they ran the Microsoft OS on the smartphones as well, and they just didn't sell, because Android and Apple at that stage were already so big, man. So like do you remember that stage in your life?
Definitely, I remember it very fondly. I definitely remember my first BlackBerry of one, which I had many. I think it was any person at that time, if you were a teenager or any South African in general, like the BlackBerry was just the most trendy thing or tech type thing you could possibly have. And I think I have to agree with what you said earlier, stating that they weren't very forward thinkers in terms of innovation of hardware and software. It was more based on the messenger, which we liked, BBM. Everyone had BBM. No one used WhatsApp at that stage very much. Like you were the oddball out if you actually used WhatsApp and not BBM. And like you said, that $6, 60 Rand at the time, paying for internet services, it was a game changer in a households who did not have much Wi-Fi, things like that. But I definitely think as well at the end, because they weren't very innovative, and when BBM and their services like moved to Android devices, etc., it changed everything. Because I mean, at the time, BlackBerry was great, but definitely still Samsung and Apple, they were more innovative in terms of software and hardware. So obviously, when BBM moved over and the service really died down, one could not really see the purpose of having a BlackBerry anymore. But in other terms of advancements, which I've been seeing in smartphones of late, which I quite like, is I've been looking into it in operating systems. Because I mean, the primary operating systems we're aware of now is like iOS or Android, which people are using. But I quite enjoy now a number of smartphones actually are going over to Linux, which I find is quite interesting in terms of privacy as well, because it's very open source. Everything on the phone in terms of application is completely open source. So in terms of your privacy and tracking is kept to an absolute limit. Like you can see who's tracking you. Stuff like Google services and stuff is not already a thing on the phone. So I definitely think Linux is like the next big thing. I don't believe it will be an Android or iOS killer anytime soon, but I definitely think if we maybe edge in towards that in Linux, I think that'll be the big new thing in smartphones, because I think we've become so much more aware of late in terms of our privacy and cookies and things like that. I don't know. What is like your thoughts on that? Like going into an age which we can find software and operating systems on our cell phones or any electronic that may be that actually limits tracking of like Google services. Because I understand the premises and like the scheme of apps like Instagram and Facebook. Obviously, they're not making the application free because of the goodness of their hearts. They have to make money somewhere, and that is like selling your data to ad companies. But limiting that to being more aware of that, I think it's the new age of technology. And what is like your opinion on this? And do you think more open source applications is the way to go? Or I don't know, what is your thoughts? Like just let me in, buddy. Like I'm curious.
Yeah, man. Like I don't know, the whole privacy issue. Like I've definitely noticed, like Apple has a massive ad campaign where they say that Apple devices are secure. They show the Apple logo with a little lock on top of it, and they'd say, "Yeah, your data is secure." There are always massive data leaks going around somewhere, man. Like one of the major transport providers and essentially government industries here in one of our states in New South Wales had a data leak. They were hacked just the other day, man. And that's got licenses on it. It's got devices, email addresses, like it's a really big issue that we face. And this whole thing about your information being kept but still accessible to certain people, it is a scary thing. Like even if you're on a device and you go into, say, a shopping center, your digital identity can be tracked as to how many devices your phone connected to while you were walking just down the corridor in the shopping center. So you have businesses who have Wi-Fi, your phone connected to those. You have other phones nearby, they've communicated to each other as well. You can you can literally thermal track someone's movements on their phone screen. You can see what apps they've opened, how they've moved, what coordinates on the screen they've gone in. It's insane, man. This the whole thing about information technology and the Internet of Things. It's cause for concern if this information gets in the wrong hands. And yeah, like we were just talking about like load shedding, and to get back to that, like, do you actually think that, because if you can't have things like Wi-Fi without the electricity source, you can't have any communications to plugged in devices that then run off batteries. Like, do you actually think that load shedding would have advantages in a world that seems really busy? Or do you just believe that it is quite inconvenient and it shouldn't have happened in the first place, man?
Yeah, obviously, I mean, there are some exterior motives and things to it which you can't control, but I honestly believe that there really is no benefit to it. If I want to be Amish, I'll live an Amish lifestyle. We live in a stage in life right now which was so dependent on Wi-Fi and electricity. For example, myself, when I have to do an assignment, I know there's load shedding happening. I always find myself driving sometimes to a part of town which doesn't have load shedding, or to a friend's house, sometimes campus. Because I also believe like a lot of like companies and things like that, if they do not have a generator, like the big companies, they like close their doors for the couple of hours which load shedding is on. So business completely halts for those hours. It's only truly the big corporations, like the big supermarkets here over like Pick and Pay and Checkers and businesses like that. But smaller businesses, I find, are the ones that are coming off at the bad end of it. So I really, in my personal opinion, I can't really see any benefit to it. It is what it is at the moment. I think the best course of action is a debate that needs to start, and what can we do to, I don't know, to stop it. Like I said, it won't stop overnight, but like I can't imagine myself taking in another 15 years of this again. It's just like resolve it in like the next 5 or 6 if possible.
Well, I mean, yeah, with information as well. Like I heard about this really cool thing, and it's called Google Trends. So with Google, and this is something you might want to look into if you ever want to like just see, if you ever want to get as close to seeing what people are looking for as you can without actually invading their privacy. Google Trends, you can go on and compare one item that's been searched with another. So you can say, how often is load shedding being searched up compared to how often is a completely unrelated topic like Spotify. Or you can say how often is load shedding Google and how often is Eskom Google. So you can see all that information happening. I imagine the word generator in South Africa, the amount of searches has probably 7-fold increased because of load shedding, man. Like, yeah, you're right. They definitely put that cost onto the consumer, where they have to go and buy a generator just to run their business, man, and to pay the bills and employ people. And the crazy thing is, load shedding doesn't even, like, if you're saying, from an environmental point of view, if we have all these devices turn off all at once, we'll be consuming less electricity, burning less diesel, and therefore we're catering for the environment. But you're really not, because you still have generators that are running for some of these businesses. There's still public transports going.
Still the generators are running on gasoline, which we've established the prices and the influx of that in the current world today. So it's really the consumer at the end of the day that is, well, being not in a sense punished, but really feeling, the effects of load shedding.
I just wonder as well, Eskom is definitely losing revenue when these events happen, when they're load shedding. But the fact is, if they're trying to save themselves by killing themselves, they can't put out. So you do ask yourself, and it's a government industry, so they can't just close down and a competitor will take over. Like, they're stuck with the problem. It does beg the question, like, what's the planning behind their actions? Like, what is that? If that's the only solution, then how do you actually prevent it from happening in the first place? Like, if there's suddenly no diesel tomorrow, then you won't have 4 stages of load shedding. There will be 6 stages of load shedding. Like I said earlier, you will have an issue, man. And I don't know about you, but I don't think the average iPhone gets more than 2 days out of its battery max. So you'll eventually have people running out of juice on those bad boys, and that'll just be that. But on that topic as well, man, I want to talk about like solar flares. In its simplest form, it is a large scale EMP that I imagine gets released from the sun or from wherever, and it actually affects electronic devices. So you'll find that your pumps that pump water to your taps, those bad boys will fail. The pumps that pump petrol at the station, those will fail. Devices will probably fail. I'm not sure if battery operated devices will be saved or not, but in a world like where load shedding exists, do you think a solar flare that it wipes out all electronic devices, let's just assume for argument's sake that except those with batteries, do you think the world would go into an apocalypse?
Well, I definitely think the effect with this would probably be of an unprecedented scale to everyone, not just the everyday consumer, but to that of the government and anything that's privatized. Yeah, man, like I just think that's going to be adding fuel to the fire of what it really is. There's nothing much more I think to say to it. I can only imagine the true ramifications of it, and I pray to God and the current geopolitical and circumstances we find ourselves in, and economically, especially with load shedding and things like that something like that doesn't happen very soon.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was the last solar flare that occurred, and it was the biggest on record, was on the 2nd of April 2001, and the sun releases an electronic magnetic pulse from its atmosphere, and it was related to the disruption of some power grids in Canada. So like you just think about, and it like traveling at a whopping speed of 7.2 million kilometers per hour towards Earth. Like that's really scary to think about. Like if these power grids got wiped out, and obviously they've been repaired since then, Canada's a flourishing economy. It just begs the question, what would happen if that was a more permanent mass effect? Like I do think we're still very vulnerable as a species that is as advanced as we have.
Example, I'm reading here, sometimes in terms of a solar flare, they release up to 10 million times more energy than a volcano.
Yeah, man. And you think about a volcano and how much energy it takes to erupt one of those bad boys. Like, and this is coming from, and it's not even something that actually hurts. Like it's just a field of energy, like,
how cool are underwater volcanoes, right? Or ice volcanoes, which I've seen before. It's just like something out of like an Alien or a Star Wars movie. Imagine Hoth, ice volcanoes. And that's just something we have here locally. Not locally, but on our dear planet, which we call Earth.
No, that's just technology for you. We were so reliant on this thing that, and ironically, technology, it's supposed to save you time, but we don't use these advanced systems that go into creating a phone. We just use them to play Candy Crush and swipe on something and use then Tinders and Snapchats, and like it's not even used for the intended purpose.
I mean, if you think about it, we used kilobytes of RAM to get on the fucking moon of all places.
Yeah.
And you're using maybe, I don't even think that much RAM could open a single Chrome tab for you today.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, like another massive issue in the technology world is storage. You find files actually are increasing in size, as you have 1080p and 2160p,
4K, 8K is now a thing.
Yeah, and if you have games, PlayStation games, they've quadrupled in size, man. I mean, the biggest one you'd ever have seen was GTA 5 and PlayStation 3, and that was maybe 10 or 16 gigs max because it was huge.
Yeah.
Now
and I look at a game like the new Call of Duty Modern Warfare, which is like over 100 gigs, I think, just to install before updates.
Yeah, exactly right. So like, and also even iPhones, man. I remember the iPhone, because we spoke about that earlier in this episode. Even like the iPhone 6 had the option to have 16 gigs of memory. Now you would not get very far with 16 gigs of memory in a phone. Like if you're transferring files from your previous phone, it's just, there's no way in hell. And yeah, it comes down to resolution, it comes down to file sizes.
I actually wonder like how much annually, I mean, like a company, for example, like Apple spends on expanding like their storage for iCloud or Google with Google Drive. I can imagine it must be quite a number, because as you said, like with things like in the modern society, we are like storage has become such a essential part of everyday society. Like the amount of storage we need now for games and entertainment. So like, I'm just curious to know, like, what number do they spend? Because obviously they have to expand upon these drives and systems and networks for us to keep going the way we do. Because I mean, storage will only go up. It will never be less. It will always be more.
Yeah, and you think about like there's more information that's permanently being created. Like Spotify, they are not only putting on every song that's ever been made, or trying to at least, but they're also putting on every new song that's ever been made as well. YouTube is constantly uploading new videos and still retaining the current videos that are already on YouTube. And these are the hundreds of millions, if not billions of videos that are just on servers, man. And yeah, with iPhone, the iCloud storage, people are taking photos. These photos get synced to the iCloud, backups on their phones. They're making millions of iPhones every year and selling millions of iPhones every year. Like it is a huge problem.
Not just
like
the simple stats I'm just seeing over here. It's like over 60,000 new tracks are uploaded to Spotify every day. And I think if we would just work out like the basic math of that, I mean, what is an average track these days? 10 megabytes?
Yeah.
Let's say 10 megabytes. That's over like 600,000. Well, fuck me, dude. Like, that is crazy. That's just Spotify. And I can imagine, like, if you include other, like YouTube and other social media stuff. And can you imagine something like TikTok or Instagram, the amount of uploads they goes every day per user? I don't know, dude. It's just crazy to think about.
Yeah, man. And that is astonishing. And even and you think about like the app stores, new apps are currently being uploaded. You're thinking about, well, even you know, cars and all those bad boys that link, like cars that are like linking up to the internet as well, and constantly communicating and sharing data with these files. It just feels like, yeah, where and when and how far do we go? Like you've got, you know, we went from megabytes, you know, to gigabytes, to terabytes, to petabytes, to octabytes. Like how far can you go? And a lot of companies have obligations to store their employees and customers' information for a certain amount of years. So they can't just delete it to make space. They simply have to increase their storage space and pay a higher premium. Like it is insane to think about. I physically can't comprehend that. But then you think about the human brain and how it's always constantly learning new things, but also retaining the information it already has. Like you'd like to try and guess how many terabytes, gigabytes, octabytes, petabytes of memory the brain can hold. Like that fascinates me. But yeah, man, look, I think going ahead, things like load shedding are definitely not gonna, it's not going to be a snap-on solution that's just going to solve the whole thing.
Thanos can't just snap his infinity stones and take load shedding away. God, I hope he does.
And cut it. No, the idea would be Thanos to cut everyone in half the population, so we can have more electricity to use, or you guys can at least.
Half the consumption.
Yeah, I do think in a world where load shedding exists in Australia and in South Africa, in our instances, I do think that the moving away from the diesel that actually goes into like these fossil fuels that goes into creating the electricity, or the turbines that get heated up to make the electricity, I think moving away from that would be the best go. Like, and that requires innovation. You know, that's the same thing that failed BlackBerry and Nokia. So I do think it'll be interesting to see what technologies get brought for that. And then, yeah, man, as for our little storage issue and those things, you know, who knows? We'll just keep upping it. You know, if we can raise the debt ceiling in the US when the debt is about to become due, then I think we can probably do the same for storage. Apples and oranges, I think, but it seems to be what's happening. So yeah, and it's still going all the way. So anyways, man, that's a wrap for technology. And I look forward to discussing whatever comes up in our next episode about technology, man.
Yeah, man. Well, very exciting quarter. I just want to thank all the listeners for tuning in again. Please remember to check out our socials and our YouTube page. And yeah, man, we'll be back next week for a very exciting another episode. Thank you again.
All right, take it away, Brendan.